Gay gorillas, floating brains, and robots. When I tell you that I wasn't ready for this episode, I mean it. If you watch my last video recounting the events of my adventures with Superman, the team is a little bit disjointed, or rather more accurately, completely broken up at the moment. But as I predicted, things are about to get back on course, and they start kind of hitting that stride right from the beginning of the episode, because Lois is trying to reach Jimmy to let him know that, Clark is the reason why she was delayed from going Sasquatch hunting with him, and she's going to go and meet up with him. But right as she's about to leave, she runs into, of course, Clark. Lois, of course, is still upset with Clark because of the whole, keeping the secret from her thing. So at first she's just wanting to dismiss him, but when he tells her that he also hasn't been able to reach Jimmy, he's tried, flying over the forest, looking with his X-ray vision, he's looked at the planet and everything, and he can't find him anywhere. So he's able to convince Lois to help him look, because he tells her that she's the best investigator that he knows. So she finally agrees to go, but not, of course, not for Clark, for Jimmy's sake. And she mentions the possibility that maybe they're just overreacting and he actually just turned off his phone and that's it, before we see that that's actually not at all what happened. So as Clark and Lois are out looking for Jimmy, we get a little bit more backstory on Lois, because she's showing her tracking abilities, and when Clark asks her where she learned that, she mentions how her father taught her all of these different things by taking her out for like wilderness weekends.
He taught me how to use a compass, find a path, purify water, set bones.
And as they continue through the woods, they happen upon a fence, and as they're looking at it, of course, Clark does mention the fact that he did fly over the woods and he didn't see this place. He's not sure exactly how it was that he was able to miss it, and there is an explanation for why he wasn't able to see it when he was flying over. That's revealed a few seconds later, because he walks through the fence and into this red field that immediately seems to weaken him. And then we see there's a whole dome of just this red energy that's surrounding the whole place. So of course it is, red sun energy that's kind of, protecting this whole place. Why exactly red sun energy? Well, it does seem we're getting more and more into like the Kryptonian element, being the reason why this different kind of technology just exists on Earth now, that's being exploited by so many different criminals, apparently through Task Force X. But then Lois does find Jimmy's phone, and with that they see the last video where he was, on the whole Sasquatch hunt. Of course, Clark jumps right to the assumption,
oh my gosh, Bigfoot kidnapped Jimmy.
And y'all remember at the end of the last episode when there was a gorilla that happened upon Jimmy? Yeah, well, we finally find out exactly who that was, and it turns out to be the Brain and Monsieur Mala. Now I have to be honest, design-wise for these characters, I'm not at all a fan of Monsieur Mala's look. It's just very, I don't know, safe gay. I mean, he's literally wearing like the standard issue cardigan along with the little glasses and everything. The Brain's design, on the other hand, I didn't like it at first, but I've actually watched the episode twice, so it's actually kind of grown on me now that I'm looking at it again. I'm like, you know what? It's actually pretty good. It's not the greatest design, but this particular design, I don't hate it, And what we have here is that the Brain wants to kill Jimmy immediately because he's assuming he's some sort of spy. So he's getting ready to take him out. But then Jimmy actually welcomes it because he feels that not only does them existing kind of prove all of his conspiracy theories, but at the same time, he's kind of thinking, my death will also be just kind of like a final, like, told you so to two very particular people. So that's why he's ready to just be killed by them. But before the machine can actually do what it's intended to do, Monsieur Mala actually turns it off and tells Jimmy that he seems troubled and asks,
would you like to talk about it?
So that's when we go back over to Clark and Lois. We then get this actually pretty cool looking scene where they come across this basically just battle graveyard where all of these soldiers are just now skeletons caught in this field where they're kind of just, floating there. And that's when they discover that this is actually a Cadmus laboratory.
I've heard that name before.
Disavowed by the government. Who knows what horrors Cadmus, aka Area 52, 2 still contains.
They have a sad little moment because he mentions how he's going to go do this with his best friends in the world or whatever. And it's after having this sad moment that Lois decides to try and confront Clark again about the whole secret identity thing by asking him, like, does Jimmy know about your secret? But when he tells her no, she's asking, well, why would you keep it a secret from him? And he tries to just change the subject, saying, you know, let's talk about something else. And of course, she decides to stop him and say, no, you need to answer my questions. And it's during this confrontation that we finally get to the real root of the problem that Lois was having with Clark having kept the whole secret identity thing, when she asks him,
You already know I'm Superman. What else do you need to know?
Did you lie about your feelings for me?
now I think it's fair to say there's been a lot of discussion about the whole, was it right for Lois to be mad at Clark for having kept a secret from her, knowing that that particular secret is one that would put her life in danger. And again, I know that a lot of people didn't like the fact that Lois would react in this particular way, but I do feel that there was some validity in her feeling this particular type of way, because it does kind of reflect something that I've actually seen before years and years ago. I didn't really think about it until I was actually watching this episode again, and it occurred to me that it reminded me of a similar situation from, of all things, the Golden Girls. Yes, follow me here, the Golden Girls. One of the girls, Rose, who was played by Betty White, she had this boyfriend named Miles Weber, or at least that was how she knew him. In the show, we actually come to find out that Miles was actually part of the witness protection program. And that's because Miles worked for a mobster known as the Cheese Man, who was basically like an accountant to him. There's an episode where there's a news broadcast one night that they all hear that apparently the Cheese Man has died. So Miles is thinking that it's safe for him to come out of hiding and resume his normal life with his actual identity. And he thinks that she'll be just as happy to find out that he can resume his past life.
For the first time in years, I've been able to call my friends and let them know where I am.
Well, you may have your life back, but I've had the rug pulled out from under mine.
Sweetheart, I had no choice. But Rose, I want you to know that the one thing I was never faking was the way I feel about you.
How can I believe you? How can I believe anything you've ever said to me?
Look, I know it sounds awful, but it's not. I can be free. I can go back to Chicago. And sweetheart, I want you there with me.
Chicago? Go to Chicago? I don't even know you.
And just like Lois here, she basically feels that she doesn't actually know if any of his feelings for her were actually real, or if they was all just part of like the secret identity and just trying to keep up appearances. This takes Clark off guard because he doesn't know how she could possibly think that he would have faked his feelings about her. But then they get attacked by some robots, so we cut back over to Jimmy and Monsieur Mala and the Brain. They show him around the Cadmus lab, and one of the things he sees is what looks like the Loch Ness Monster, and Mala does tell him that it is one of the mutants that they lost somewhere in Scotland. And then this is where we get the backstory on Mala and the Brain, where we find out that they worked for Cadmus, and Cadmus was supposed to be like a sister organization to Task Force X. They were both supposed to be coming up with new weapons and ways of destruction, but Cadmus decided to focus more on creating things rather than trying to make things that will destroy. And one of the things apparently was giving this gorilla intelligence, and then the scientist that was working on it actually fell in love with him, and that's the Brain. Yeah, he fell in love with the gorilla. He fell in love with the gorilla. He fell in love with the... And I just want to make one thing clear. These are not gay characters, okay? Because, let's be fair, for them to be gay characters, they would both have to be human, right? Never mind the fact that the Brain is just a brain. But let's focus on the fact that even when the Brain wasn't just a brain, Mala was always just a gorilla. Like, hyper-intelligence or not, it's just a gorilla. Like, it's not a human. So... that's just a bestiality couple. And you know what? I will accept a same-sex couple, but I absolutely draw the line at bestiality, even if it is with hyper-intelligent gorillas. I will accept no arguments on this. And we see where Task Force X is sent in to attack Cadmus because it's found out that they aren't developing weapons. Instead, they're developing stuff to try and like benefit humanity instead. So that's a big no-no. So of course they go in to attack. And in this version of the story, Mala is talking about how their attack ends up blowing up the console that was basically controlling this black hole generator that they're working on. And I say in this version of the story because it's not the last time we're going to hear about it. Then Jimmy tries relating to them on the abandonment issue because of his ongoing conflict with Lois and Clark. And then while the two of them are arguing about whether or not Jimmy can stay there, he sneaks away and finds that they actually have another black hole at the moment. And that's when we go back over to Lois and Clark, who are currently still running from the robots. And these robots are apparently the OMAC. Why? I don't know. I kind of prefer the OMAC to look more like this. I would even take this. But instead they're going more like the robotic route, like from the New 52 DC Comics, which really wasn't my favorite, especially not in the New 52 Future's End story. That story was just terrible. But he, of course, eventually gets the idea that maybe he should just try flying them away from the situation. And when he tries doing so, when he gets close enough to the Red Sun barrier, eventually it takes its toll on him and basically just completely nullifies his powers. So he falls back down and is telling Lois that his powers are feeling weaker. So as they continue to run through the forest, we see where they're springing different booby traps that have been set up along the way to the Cadmus laboratory. And a few of them do manage to basically stop the OMACs for a little bit, but then they run across one that actually activates a turret, and when it's about to shoot at Lois, Superman jumps in the way, and while he's shielding her, it completely disintegrates the jacket that he's wearing. He's able to withstand the whole barrage from this particular turret, and then once it stops, she's asking how he knew that he was bulletproof, and he said he didn't know, that he just knew that she wasn't. So again, with the Superman-like qualities, he jumped in even if he didn't know that he could actually stop the threat, because of course Superman is always going to jump in front of the bullet before anybody else can get hurt. And of course I would be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that they did take the opportunity to go ahead and get a close-up on Superman's physique. They even have him looking like he's been slathered with a little bit of oil, you know what I mean? So they really sold it, I'm not gonna lie. I mean, well done and everything. I don't really, I'm not the type to get like turned on by cartoons or whatever, but I see what they're trying to do, and I for one am not mad about it. So now Jimmy is confronting Mala and the Brain about the whole black hole situation, asking if it's the same one that destroyed the facility, and they tell him no, of course not, this is actually a new one. So when he asks them why they rebuilt it, Mala is telling him that they actually rebuilt it because what really happened was that they actually blew it up so that way they could help others escape.
But since then, we have lived a simple life of peace.
And he explains to him that they're working on trying to stabilize it so that way they can use it as a wormhole, so that way they can go and explore different areas, different dimensions or whatever. That way they might find somewhere where they aren't feared, which, considering the goods they're trying to move, that's a tall order, but I wish them all the best of luck with it. And of course we get an obvious setup to the problem when Mala lets Jimmy know that there's really nothing to worry about so long as the energy flow to the facility isn't cut off. And we see Clark and Lois outside as Clark is forcing the doors open, and while he's trying to warn Lois that there may be whatever kind of danger, he gets punched in the face by Brain, who's wearing his new robot body, right before Mala comes charging out, and still somehow Jimmy, I guess, beat both of them out there and runs between all of them and tells everybody to stop. Then we get one of these moments where the villains stand in moral superiority to the heroes, because, they were there for Jimmy more than Clark and Lois.
I mean, yes, we did forget about camping.
Ouais, d'accord. We will give you space.
Then we get to the moment where Clark finally decides that enough time has gone by, he needs to reveal his secret to Jimmy, but before he can actually say the words, Jimmy just goes ahead and reveals to him, look, I know you're Superman, I've known for a long time, which of course takes both Clark and Lois by surprise. So when he's asking him how long he's known,
we've been roommates since freshman year. The day I met you, you ripped the handle off of the door, then tried to play it like the screws had just come loose.
I mean, it could have been the screws.
The handle was was ripped in half.
Jimmy tells him that he figured this was just a sensitive subject for him, so for that reason he decided not to bring it up to him, so that when Clark was ready for it, he would come to Jimmy and tell him the truth. And then we see the classic best friend dilemma when Lois confronts Jimmy, asking him, well, if you knew his secret, why didn't you tell me? So instead of really answering her question, he just kind of puts together that, oh, you told Lois before you told me, so then of course he's upset with Clark about that.
Hold up. You told Lois before you told me? Your best friend?
And then Clark basically shuts down the whole thing.
It's been a weird 24 hours. My powers aren't working, and we've been chased all over this place by robots, so let's just take a deep breath and stop yelling!
And then after he mentions the robots, Monsieur Mala, who was listening over the speaker, informs them that they never built any robots as part of their defenses, so whatever was chasing them wasn't built by them, which right at that moment, that's when the robots actually do show up again. And it's while they're trying to hold them off that the brain basically reveals that the OMACs were sent by Task Force X. They were their original kill squad or whatever. And again, it just bothers me that they have this as the OMACs, because that's not OMAC. Like, the name literally, or it used to stand for One Man Army Corps, so man, it's supposed to be one person. I don't know really what the acronym they're going to use for this particular show, because these very obviously are not men. With these, I'd imagine they're probably going with some other acronym. They have had some other ones, including... Actually, you know what? I don't know what the other ones are. Let me see. Omni, Mind, and Community. Observational Metahuman Activity Construct. I don't like either of these. But anyway, once the OMACs break in, that's when Mala decides to call in the reinforcements, and that's when they bring in these things. I don't know why, but I get the feeling there's some sort of word in Japanese for whatever type of style these things are supposed to be. You know what I mean? This very obviously feels like some sort of something that I've seen before. They kind of remind me of old Mighty Morphin Power Rangers villains, quite honestly. So of course Jimmy feels compelled to ask what are these things, and Mala tells him that they got bored 1 year into their isolation, so they decided to go ahead and just make a bunch of mutants.
But other than creating a black hole and an army of mutants, we live a simple life of peace.
Then they end up retreating back to where the black hole is, because Mala is concerned that the containment field for the black hole is going to be disrupted. So because of that, they go to make sure there isn't another explosion like the last time. And after giving instructions to Clark on what he needs to keep doing, the rest of them try to fight it off. But this is when we get the moment where Jimmy decides to confront Clark and ask him, why did you cut me out of this whole part of you being Superman thing? And he ends up revealing to both of them that he just didn't want anybody to view him as anything other than their friend and Clark. He didn't want them to just view him as some sort of alien or just Superman. Then we do get a little bit of a sacred moment when Jimmy is reassuring Clark that they don't really care about what he is, they just care about who he is. That's why they want to, be friends with him or whatever. And then Lois is telling him that they don't really care about the whole Superman thing, they just want him to be open with them. And that tortured cliche ends up giving Mala, I guess, the brain blast that he needed to realize that the way to deal with the problem was actually to open the containment field of the black hole, so that once it hits critical mass, it will actually stabilize, or at least in theory. Then naturally they almost get sucked into the black hole, but just by the skin of their teeth, they manage to hang on until the black hole does end up stabilizing, creating the wormhole that they had discussed earlier. And Mala is talking about how they're going to have to leave now because the Red Sun Omega field that was keeping the whole facility hidden is no longer active, so people are going to be able to find this place now. And this is when we get a little bit more of the intrigue, because the brain comes over to Clark and asks him if he's come across the general yet. And of course Clark is surprised about this when he starts asking him how he knows about all of that. He tells him,
The OMEX woke up after you entered our perimeter. The Omega field affected you. The tech reacts to you. I don't know what they gave us 22 years ago, but you are somehow caught in the middle of it.
And the brain warns him that he is in the crosshairs of Task Force X, which means he's going to have to go up against the general. And he does give him the opportunity to possibly go with him and Mala to explore different worlds and everything like that, but Clark ends up saying no, he needs to stay here, this is where he's needed. And then we see the moment where the team is coming back together, and we get that further cemented when Lois ends up grabbing Clark's hand, showing that she is ready to continue with where they left off romantically, now that they've kind of, I guess, buried the hatchet somewhat. And then we get the really sweet moment when Mala and the Brain walk into the portal to go and explore these other worlds together, just like they had planned on doing. So really sweet moment, but it's still beastie. Then the next thing we see is actually where the general comes in and he's looking around the facility, seeing the remains of the robots. And then he's remarking to the person he's brought with him that this was actually his first assignment, the first place he started working. And then we see the reveal that is actually Anthony Ivo. And he tells Ivo he wants him to examine the technology here and get it up and working again. And when Ivo asks him why exactly he would do something like that, he tells him that it's because they want the same thing, which is to take down Superman. So of course Ivo is all in because now he does obviously hate Superman. And this is where I'm kind of talking about there's going to be a switch a little bit here in that these people are going to start being endowed with these powers. Again, I don't really like the whole parasite thing for Anthony Ivo, but this is kind of showing what I was talking about with him, showing that now the power is a part of him rather than him having to rely on some suit. And that's the episode as we have it for now. So I'm not gonna lie, I'm kind of liking where this is going. There's a little bit more intrigue. There are still some very goofy elements to this show, there's no doubt about that, but I do actually enjoy it overall. You know, as a whole product, I like it, especially because the focus on the main character. The side characters and villains, like, those are things that can be fleshed out a little bit more and possibly even changed altogether as the show goes on. But I need them to actually get, like, the main character right, which thankfully they do at least have Clark right. So that is enough of a draw to keep me coming back to it. So I'm going to be continuing to watch this, hoping for that grand event that just, it has to be coming, where they're going to end up giving people more powers. So we'll see how exactly that's going to be handled, but overall, I don't know. I didn't really know how to feel about. Granted, I'm not the biggest fan of Monsieur Mala and the Brain. They aren't villains that I really ever think about all that much. So as far as, you know, how they were actually portrayed in the show, I mean, yeah, obviously they were going for, you know, the whole gay couple angle, but I don't see it. Like I said, call me a bigot if you want, but I feel like both parties need to at least be human for me to see it in that particular light. So I don't see it. But anyway, if you watched the episode, feel free to let me know what you thought about it down below in the comment section. Even if you didn't watch it and you just learned about what happened in the episode from my video, feel free to share your thoughts with me anyway. Like the video if you liked it. If you didn't like it, there is a button for that. But if you're not subscribed, make sure to subscribe. And if you're done here, I would appreciate it if you would go and read a book. But if not, then I'll see you on my next video.